Well, morning, everyone. Thanks very much for taking the time to be here at an early start in Hammersmith. What I'm going to talk about is, first of all, how Airbnb came to be what it is and put some of its growth. Pause for a little bit on kind of the sharing economy and try and demystify some of the things that are in an oft overused phrase. And then lastly, share some of the, themes that we believe have underpinned some of the success that we've had over the last 8 years. And it's only saying something when this is a company that's younger than this conference, when we started in 2008. So actually how it started was not how can we change accommodation, how can we be a successful business. It was a pretty simple problem of we need to pay next month's rent. So this is the front room of the apartment that our three founders shared in San Francisco in 2008. Their landlord was increasing the rent for the next period, and they were trying to think of what they had, which meant that they could actually make some money. So they could get extra jobs, they could sell some stuff, or they could actually make better use of the space and the assets that you already had. So this is the front room. They had 3 air beds in the back, and they realized that there was a design conference coming to San Francisco, and the usual style of big conferences, hotels were fully booked. Anything that was available was probably $500 a night, and they were able to advertise and create air bed and breakfast, which was an air bed billed with continental breakfast, which I think was the choice you had was, do you want a strawberry or a chocolate Pop-Tart at the start? And I think what's somewhat shocking about this website is that people did actually use it, but that it was more about who the guests were and what happened with those guests that allowed our founders to think about this being something more than just how can we make an extra few $100 to pay the rent, and to something that they felt like this is a business that we want to kind of devote our time to. And it really was the guests themselves. So it was far from what you might imagine of a 23-year-old who has no money who is using this versus couch surfing. The 3 guests were 2 Americans in their mid-30s from LA and New York, and then an Indian guy who was in his mid-40s, father of 3, who'd flown over from Bangalore. And they're all in the design community, as were 2 of our founders. And they actually, more than just spending time together in terms of in the flat, they also went to the conference together, showed them around their neighborhood, and actually spent some time together and sort of showed them what it was like to live where they live in San Francisco. And when the founders felt that there was something that this could be a bigger thing than just staying in touch and being friends, was when the lady from New York, a lady called Catherine, she sent them an email about 6 weeks later saying, I love San Francisco so much, I've actually taken a job in San Francisco and I'm looking to live in the same kind of area where you are. So let me know if you hear of any flats coming up, and would love to catch up for a coffee. That was the bit that they realized that it was because she felt like she was actually from there and saw what real life was like. She was actually prepared to move all the way across the country and set up life in San Francisco. So really realizing that people, when they're traveling, still want to have that local experience and feel like what it means to be a San Franciscan or a Londoner or a Parisian. So if you fast forward to now, fortunately our website looks a bit better, and if you see how the growth has gone over the years, this is the size of the circle is a number of listings, which is Airbnb properties in a particular area. So in 2009, it's New York, and that's about it. Then you can see some growth towards Europe, and in 2012 was a time of quite big international expansion in terms of opening offices. We opened around 8 or 9 offices in about 3 months around the world, and that since then it's now been moving more into Asia Pacific and to Latin America and some parts of Africa. And by the end of last year, well, in fact, I can update some of these figures that there's 2.5 million places to stay on Airbnb around the world. The only countries where you can't stay in an Airbnb are Iran, North Korea, Syria, and South Sudan. And that's less because, I'm sure their tourism boards do fantastic work, but it's more that as an American company, there's some countries you're not allowed to do any business with. So that's enough of the sales pitch and the history. I guess now if I talk on, it's variously called the sharing economy, the gig economy, the on-demand economy. And there's a whole lot of different things in here, and to be honest, the only thing you can really get from a slide with all the different logos and companies is that there's pretty much the same designer does everything, because it all looks like either all lowercase or all uppercase letters with a little sort of thing on the side. But these are companies that exist in so many different industries, whether it's pet care or accommodation or transportation or retail or hire, that actually trying to see what links them together is often quite hard. And I find this quite useful, which is from think tank Nesta, and it talks about what are the shared properties between a bunch of these companies. And many of these have applications for businesses that aren't sharing economy ones. So I think I take like the top two is really what allows this to happen over the last few years rather than before, is that the ability to connect to people who have either a need for an asset or the spare asset has meant it's extended the network beyond that. I guess taking BlaBlaCar, a ride-sharing platform as an example, that it means you don't need to know if someone's driving from Heathrow to Bristol next Tuesday in order to get a lift. You don't need to have that person in your personal network. You can use the marketplace and the internet to be able to do that. And similarly, if you got given a Black & Decker power tool for Christmas and you're never going to use it, that you could actually put that on a power tool sharing site and that people in the local area could also look to rent it. So that's connecting those networks of people and assets, but using the internet. And ultimately, it's the third one that I think there's no surprise that a lot of these companies came out in that 2008, 2010 financial crisis time of how can you make more use of what you have to make a bit of money. And then I think it's the last two that's probably the most applicable for any business. So you have these kind of vast distributed networks of someone saying, I've got a spare room here, or I've got a seat going in my car there. But how do you feel that this is something that you're prepared to do, and that it's going to, first of all, be safe, second of all, deliver on what you expect it, and third, could actually be quite an enjoyable experience? And it's the power of like reviews. And in many ways, it was like the retail business that started that online review as, if you think of eBay, Amazon, etc., that you know what you get when you're buying. But now taking that on to be able to have it so that you know that if you're looking at someone's flat in London on Airbnb, and if there's 20 reviews which are all 5-star, you can feel that that's as good as it being your best friend that lives there or a friend of a friend recommendation. And again, that's how the internet's really allowed that currency of trust in terms of reviews to build. And I think that's something which really underpins peer-to-peer networks. So then how can what are some of the things which we believe has helped Airbnb grow that can be relevant for every business? I think first one is, what's the experience you're giving versus what are the features that you have or you're giving? So we aim to connect people to travel experiences, and in some ways we do this by unlocking things that people wouldn't be able to do in any other way. So whether it's castles or staying in IKEA or building a house and floating it down the Thames, or the most recent one we had was allowing people to stay in Abbey Road with Mark Ronson as the host. But I think more importantly, it's on the day-to-day, what happens in a normal stay on Airbnb. I think the best way to start is actually to compare 2 reviews for the same hotel. I think it's like a Hilton in Marylebone. Don't quote me on that, but I think it's a kind of a very, very good, very nice hotel. And if I was the hotel manager, I'd be quite pleased with both of these reviews. But if you look on the one on the left, it's 4-star review. Again, if I was a hotel manager, job done, I'm pretty happy with that. And the person says, the facilities are good, the facilities are excellent, in fact. Standard of customer service is strong, excellent sort of location. And in fact, the person stayed there many times. But I think if you look at the one on the other side, the 5-star, what the difference is that there's actually had some interaction with a person. So he names Josephina, the waitress, or the guy at the swimming pool. And that's actually helped him to feel a bit more at home where he's staying. And I think this is where you can start to see that there's an experience more, even if it's just as simple as having a small chat with someone versus pure features. And if I had the time and research to do a PhD, then I've got a theory that you can't get above 4 out of 5 for purely features. To get 5 out of 5, you need to have some kind of greater interaction or feeling beyond that to get an experience. And if you compare to This is actually, I used to live in Singapore, and when I moved back to London, I spent about a couple of months staying in different Airbnbs around London, and this was a guy that I stayed with in Shoreditch. And I think the difference here is you can see that Khaled's name comes out probably in the first 3 words in every single review. And it does talk about the features that, his flat was clean and tidy, well located, but so much of the review comes about the feeling that they had and the kind of the tips that they got from Khaled as the person who lives there and is the expert. And this promotes a greater experience versus just having, here's a 40 square meter room with TV and bathroom attached. It gives you a feel of what it's like to be in Shoreditch. So then the second bit is how we look to try and run our business itself. So for anyone who's easily offended by swear words, look away now, because I'm going to show a letter which came from one of Airbnb's investors, Peter Thiel, when our founders asked him, what's the biggest bit of advice you have for us? So I'll let you read this for a second. And so this was a company-wide email, and I think the founders were expecting, when they were talking to Peter Thiel this time, this was in 2012, when Airbnb was probably at that inflection point of starting to go a bit more mainstream. And they were probably expecting him to say, watch your marketing dollars, or hire a really good CFO, or some of those kind of more generic bits of advice. But it was that idea of, don't fuck up what you have. And that if I share a couple of things which I think make this come through, is that I think most of us have worked at companies where there's some idea of, here's whatever, we call it core values, or here's ways of working, what we all believe. And I think what's different about Airbnb that I've seen versus anywhere else that I've worked or worked with is that they actually wrote these before they employed anyone else. So they realized that hiring the first person that wasn't one of the 3 founders was such a kind of big step that they wanted to almost codify what they were looking for in that candidate, as well as being really good at the job. I mean, admittedly, they had the benefit of, it was about 18 months between when they started and when they were at the stage where financially they could afford to hire someone, so they probably had a fair amount of time to think about it. But these are the 6 that we have, and I'm not going to go through them all, but I think the way in which we try and make these be to come alive, and rather than just being something that's stuck on by your desk at work that you don't really look at, but that we interview against these. So whenever any kind of interview evaluation that I have to do for a potential candidate, we have to rate everyone on these 6 values, as well as talking about, are they a great business development person, or what are their skills in terms of communications. And then these are also part of our performance review process. So in our most recent annual review, I had to put in which of these 6 did I think that I was I exemplified the most, and which of the 6 did I need to work on the most. So things which keep evolving and be able to come alive, and it becomes that common language that people can use. Then the third and last bit I've got to share is around the nature of your community and how you can use that to both be your advocates, how you can listen to them, and actually, in some cases, how they can be a direct part of your marketing. So for us, our hosts, the people that share the properties, and the guests, the people that stay there, are our community. And particularly it's the hosts where the stories about why they choose to host they tell the brand ideal and the nature of who we are far better than I can or any of my colleagues. And for example, like Tessa, the lady who hosts up in North London, she came to it as her kids left home, her husband died, and she had spare 2 rooms in the flat. And this allowed her to be able to feel like she was traveling and meet people from all around the world, as well as making a bit more money into the process. And so there's different reasons why people come to host, but understanding the why they come both helps us to, more kind of tactically, what sort of marketing messages should we do, what kind of deals should we do. But I think more broadly, it's how can we help serve them better. And one of the ways we do that is through having an annual conference for our hosts. So maybe not unlike this one or Dreamforce for Salesforce, where we have 5,000 hosts from probably 100 different countries. Last year was in Paris. It's coming up in November in LA, where it's a mixture of actually spending a lot of time listening to our hosts and finding out how we can work with them better, guest speakers, This time we've even got a couple of like performances. I think Maroon 5 are doing a little bit for the host there. But more importantly, it's a lot of the more sessions around hospitality and getting to meet people from different areas so that you can actually get a broader view of what hospitality is, and it really helps us to run our business. Just last year, we had probably 25, 30 of our engineers came to the conference, and anytime there was a product sort of suggestion that came from a host, they evaluated it, and if it was very easy to do and they felt it made sense, they just did it there and then, and there was probably, I don't know, at least 50 tweaks made in that 3 days to the product for hosts based on direct feedback. And then one more example I have to share is how you can use your community to actually be a real driving force in your marketing. So we did, at the start of 2015, $1 million marketing campaign. Not the most exciting amount of money or anything, but the way in which it worked was that on January 1st, 100,000 randomly selected hosts around the world woke up to an email from our CEO going, "Hi there, Airbnb host, Happy New Year. We decided to put $10 into your bank account. We transfer the money once they have guests, so we know their bank details. We've transferred another $10 for you. We'd like you to do something in the next week or so which helps to create one less stranger in the world." And obviously, we would very much like it if you put a nice little hashtag, one less stranger, whack it on social media, but that there was no strings attached. They didn't have to click accept that they were going to do something in a contractual format. And I'm sure that quite a few hosts woke up maybe a little bit bleary on 1st of January and went, "Oh, all right, thanks, Mr. Airbnb, I'll just pocket that and leave it behind." But we actually had some really sort of, I guess, some very simple ones of people turning around in the coffee shop and buying a coffee for the person behind them, to some very elaborate things of far more than $10 of expense. One of our London hosts was on holiday in Israel and asked for anyone that knew anyone who was living in Tel Aviv to come to a dinner party that she was going to host at the place in which she was staying. So something that if you actually allow some of the creativity to the people that know you best, you can get ideas and actually stories that a creative agency probably wouldn't be able to come up with in a million years. So that's it from me in terms of the things which I think have ability for any business to think about, is how you're providing experiences versus the pure features that your product has. How do you run your business, and how does what you believe in manifest itself on a day-to-day level? And then lastly, who are the people that know you best, and how can you actually let them do more to talk about how great you are, but also how they can talk to you about where they need some help? And thanks very much.